What's up, you creepy fucks, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror podcast. Welcome to the Creep Zone, where we have very honest, in-depth, unrated, unfiltered conversations about something from the world of horror. On this episode, I'm very excited about it because this is one of those movies that when I first wanted to do the show, I sort of started thinking about the movies that I want to talk about. Poltergeist was always one of those movies that was on that list of one day I'm going to get to talking about it. And now, like over 4 years later, somehow I've managed to get there. And I'm really excited about it because this is a movie that I'm excited about talking about the movie itself, because the journey that we're on in this movie is a fantastic one. But also there is some controversy about everything that went on behind the scenes. You know, is the movie cursed? Who actually fucking made the movie? Who fucking knows? Only the people that were there, I'm guessing. I'm never going to know. But I'm really excited about talking about everything about this movie. And then with me on this episode, which is another thing that I'm really excited about, because I have with me Dave and Bryan, who are real life brothers. So for the first time on the show, we've actually got brothers. Unless nobody else has told me. I could have fucking had loads of brothers or something like that on the show, and they just haven't bloody told me. But we've got real life brothers on the show. Bryan and Dave, they are from the Bring Me the Axe podcast, which is obviously it's a horror podcast, a horror comedy podcast. It's basically chatting about the best and worst of what horror has to offer. Hello, Bryan and Dave. Thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, we're glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, so as I said, you guys are from the how can I forget? Bring Me the Axe horror comedy podcast. We're going to promote absolutely bloody everything that you do at the end. You can tell everyone where they can go and find you. But right now, we're also going to get into talking about Poltergeist. Poltergeist was released in 1982. It's directed by Tobe Hooper. Although for some fucking reason, when I was a kid, I kept on calling him Tobe Hooper. I don't know why. I think it's just the spelling.
I did the same thing. It's the spelling, and you'd never heard anybody say it out loud. It's not like, you know, all I'd ever seen the name was in on print. And like I'd never seen interviews with the guy on TV or anything like that. And so all of a sudden the internet comes along and like people who know are saying his name out loud. And it's like, oh, Toby. Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. Tobe is a weird name, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm so happy. You have no idea how happy that makes me to know I'm not the only person that was calling in Tobe.
Oh, no, I guarantee like there's 1,000 people out there who are like, oh, yeah, I always knew it was Tobe Hooper. And then, like, you know, in their heads, they're like, I had no idea. This is new to
me. Yeah, I always thought Tobe was a weird fucking name. Yeah. But yeah, so it's directed by, as we know, Tobe Hooper. Written by Steven Spielberg, but obviously we're probably going to get all into that and the controversy that goes around that. You guys may even know more than what I do. I only know what I know about it, so it'd be interesting to know if you guys know more than what I do about the whole situation of what Poltergeist is and was and made and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we did this one back in October. For our Halloween series, and we had our friend Sean Abley on, and like we put it through the ringer. Like we gave it the usual treatment that we do, because like our whole thing is like we research the hell out of every movie that we cover.
Oh, good. It's so nice when I have people that I mean, it's not hard because I'm thick as shit, but it's so nice when I have people that are on my show that are way more intelligent than me and research stuff, because obviously I can't research stuff because it goes in one ear, out the other. In my brain, it's fucking gone. So it's nice to know that you're going to be able to like actually enlighten me with some real information rather than me getting stuff off fucking Wikipedia. So the film is starring Heather O'Rourke, Jo Beth Williams, Craig T. Nelson, or Nelson, whatever. I get the names wrong all the fucking time. Beatrice Straight, Oliver Robbins, Zelda Rubinstein or Rubenstein. Do you know which one it is? I don't fucking know.
I believe it's Rubenstein.
Yeah.
There we go. There, told you. Once again, you guys are going to be here like clarifying everything I fucking say. And also, there is a very short moment where the actor Dirk Blocker, which is a fucking great and bad name at the same time, but he's the guy that plays, I think it's Hitchcock in a program called Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And I didn't even realise it was him until I watched it the other night. I've seen this movie so many times throughout my life, and then it only just occurred to me that it was Hitchcock, and I was like, oh fuck, there he is.
Yeah, you got about 40 years between the two projects, but he's also in Prince of Darkness, I think.
That's what I was going to say, because randomly, like recently, he keeps on popping up in like some of the horrors that I watch. So like he popped up, like you said in Prince of Darkness. He plays a really early movie that Brad Pitt was in. He was in a movie called Cutting Class, and he's like the douchey gym teacher in that. Which once again I didn't even know until recently. I was just like, oh, finally I get to watch Cutting Class, because everybody knows in the UK we're very fucking shit when it comes to horror. We get nothing. So Cutting Class is one of those movies where it's like a proper deep cut that loads of people over here never even knew about, and then finally we get to watch it, and then there's Hitchcock. He just fucking pops up and he's an absolute dickhead in it. But yeah, he just keeps on popping up every now and again, which is nice.
We've been watching that sitcom recently, like a lot, and so I was like, oh yeah, it's Dirk Blocker. I love seeing that guy in just about anything. He's funny.
Yeah, he just pops
His character
up
in Brooklyn Nine-Nine is also hilarious. Yeah,
he's great in it, and it's nice seeing him just like an absolute sweaty, drunken mess on a kid's BMX riding around trying to watch the football game. It's like right at the start of the movie, and it really sort of sets up the movie for like the tone of what the rest of it is sort of going to be. But yeah, so it's got a big cast in it, and I'm sure obviously we'll talk about the cast in it. It's on IMDb at 7.3 out of 10, 88% still on Rotten Tomatoes. Not that fucking matters, I just like putting it in there. Google synopsis wise, it's a family's dream home turns into their worst nightmare when evil spirits rise up to torment them and possess the soul of their innocent daughter. That's pretty much what happens in the movie, but obviously we're going to go into it a little bit more detail. Google is shit, as we always know, but sometimes they're laughably bad. That one was all right. I always ask my guests, when was the first time that you saw the movie? Sometimes, as I said, sometimes when they're newer movies, it don't matter. But with an old school classic like this, it'd be interesting to know. So was this something that you guys saw in your childhood or watched along the way?
Yeah, this was one of the... I saw this in 1985 for the first time. I was like 10, and it was like a real formative experience for me, because like I'd been in love with horror movies for years at that point. Like, you know, we'd moved into a town that had not a horror host show, like, you know, like Vampire, Vampire or Svengoolie or anything like that. But we had an afternoon horror movie show, but it was all like AIP and like schlocky monster movies, stuff from the 50s and 60s. So it was a real kind of like soft vector into horror. But for me, this was one of the first times that I saw something that was kind of modern, and it was formative. It stuck with me.
I probably saw it, I'm going to guess a couple of years later. This was on TV a lot.
I saw it. They ran it on TV. I watched it with Mom.
Yeah.
And
of course it was also PG, so it was one of those rated PG. It was one of those ones that I think there was some controversy about it, the rating system later because of this, and it kind of tricked parents. They would see the rating and be like, okay, this is fine. And this movie I was probably terrifying to me as a child. I can't imagine that it wouldn't be. It has some frightening visuals, but yeah, it's also it is like the quintessential American 80s movie. And one of the things we complain about a lot is the way that the 80s gets represented now in media as very, neon and a big funky fashion. But in reality, the 80s was pretty dumpy. There's a lot of earth tones, really ugly colors, aesthetically not very appealing.
Wood paneled basements.
Yeah. And so I think this visually, it's like this is what the 80s really looked like. Everybody was just kind of bland looking, and so yeah, I think this was anytime I think about like what is the quintessential 80s movie, it's this.
I was thinking about that last night, like watching it. It was definitely this is such a point in history. It's like a real hinge point because like, you know, I think what we always kind of pinpoint the 80s beginning proper is like 1984 was a real sort of pop cultural moment, like a flashpoint where
Gremlins
absolutely
stuff,
everything changed. Gremlins, Ghostbusters, Prince, Cyndi Lauper, you know, all of that stuff kind of like really kind of takes off. But like up until about that point, you're really sort of still feeling the hangover of the 70s. And we do a lot of movies from 1982 on our pod, and they all have a tendency to sort of look like movies made in the 70s. But like this movie does not. This is an 80s movie, like right down to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I there's so much amazing stuff that, like what you've just said, like, and touching on, and it is so interesting because, so like I said, like I mean, I've always said how much I hate being in this country and how I just, because we're so fucked when it comes to horror, and especially obviously even now, obviously it's so much better than it used to be. But when I was a kid, every obviously anybody that listens and watches the show, that they know that like I had to be the kid that I would go and steal Fangoria magazines if I wanted them. I would have to like get my mum to go and rent all these movies if they ever came out. But there is so many movies as a kid that I like missed out on because we're so bad over here when it comes to horror. Like it's always been really bad. So I get so jealous of anyone that I have on my show, and predominantly a lot of my guests are from America and that, and I get so jealous when I get to hear like your childhood memories of like these and this and movies like this and so on. But luckily this is one of the movies that I did get to watch because like you mentioned as well, and I really like the point you made, where this feels like the quintessential sort of like American movie, and talking about like how it is like showing what America or what the 80s was really like, and how we're sort of almost blinded by what they're saying, the nostalgia of what 80s is like with the neon lights and so on like that. Like the aesthetic of what they're saying the 80s is now isn't necessarily what the 80s aesthetic was. And I really like that you sort of mentioned that. But this movie is very 80s. It feels very 80s, and we're getting to, you know, the aesthetics and everything like that as well. But what's really interesting about this movie is how, when you mentioned about it was, you know, essentially almost put out there as like a kids movie. And that's what's so interesting about this movie, is that it, because it's sort of like shrouded in this sort of like the hierarchy of Spielberg, and as soon as you put Spielberg on a cover, on the posters, and you're straight away you're thinking, you know, Goonies, Gremlins, all that sort of stuff, and you're like, this is going to be fun, family friendly horror that isn't going to have people standing in the mirror ripping their fucking face off, you know, or a woman swimming around with potentially dead bodies, which we'll talk about as well. So this is one of those movies that when I watched it as a kid, I did not expect at all going into it what we got. But when I came out of it, I was just like, that was even better than what I thought it was going to be, which is obviously always a great feeling as a kid. And then obviously growing up, I you know, it's a movie that I still love. And now I get to pass that on to my daughter, who literally wants to fucking watch this movie all the time. She wants to see some guy ripping his face off constantly. In such a crazy scene, in what, as I said, is like almost feels like it was always billed as like a kids movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they went out of their way to really slap Spielberg's name on this. There's a poster that has like a giant block of text. It's like, I don't know, 10 or 12 lines of text that just talks about Steven Spielberg. It's like, doesn't even, I don't know how that's a successful poster, but they pushed him hard.
Well, yeah, this was 82 was like the summer of Spielberg, because E.T., I believe E.T. came out 2 weeks before this movie came out. Oh. And like the E.T. and this movie both had sort of comparable budgets, but E.T. made nearly $1 billion in its initial theatrical run. You've also got, like, everybody is still really feeling Jaws. That was only a few, like 7 years before. That one made nearly $1 billion. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark came out the year before, which is also a huge thing. So like, of course, he's like drunk with power at this point. Like 1982 is like the absolute peak. I mean, or one of the absolute peaks of Spielberg. So like, of course they're going to sort of trot him out and put him front and center, because nobody's heard of Tobe Hooper. Like the movie he made before this was The Funhouse, and as much as I love The Funhouse, it's no, you know, it's not Raiders of the Lost Ark or Close Encounters of the Third Kind or Jaws, or it's not like it's not even in the same league. So like it makes perfect sense that they're going to put Steven Spielberg front and center of this project, which I think has a lot to do with the sort of rumors and the conjecture that has to do with like, well, who really made this movie? Well, Toby Hooper made this movie, and everybody who was in the production has said as much. But I can understand why people would start to be like, hey, wait a second.
Well, there was a Los Angeles Times article that came out just a month before the movie. It was one of their reporters went to the set and sort of spent the day there, and the article pretty heavily implies that not that Steven Spielberg wrote or directed the movie, but that he was very, very much involved in the more so in the creative process than a producer otherwise would be. I mean, he storyboarded like half the movie, and so this article comes out, and it suggests that he maybe Toby Hooper doesn't have the same control over the movie that a director usually does, and so that's kind of where that rumor gets started. And then I think there were a sort of split between the cast, the crew, where some people really sided with him and other people sided with Toby Hooper. But there was a Directors Guild investigation into this question of like, who did this? They took it very seriously, but I don't think at any time there was like a rivalry. It just seems like Steven Spielberg's personality is just so kind of, I don't want to say overbearing, but like he's a huge director at the time. And so it just, I think he just kind of comes on the set and goes into that mode and maybe forgets sometimes that he's not the director, because this had happened. This happened on a movie he had made previous. That movie, Used Cars, with I think Robert Zemeckis directed that.
Yeah.
It got to the point where Kurt Russell had to say like, hey guys, I can't take direction from two people. One of you has to direct this movie. Who's it going to be? And then Steven Spielberg was like, "Oh, I get it. I'll back off." But it just seems like that's like that's just his personality. And I mean, I guess I get it if you're used to directing, like, and so he just sort of couldn't help himself. But yeah, it really gets blown out of proportion. And then he wrote like this weird, crazy letter, like this open letter, I think that got published in I think it's in the Times. That it's really passive aggressive, like his reaction to people saying this. It is a strange letter.
Yeah. And I mean, but also I think where we ended up sort of like in our analysis of this was that it makes a lot of sense that he would have such a hands-on role. I mean, apart from just kind of being an overbearing, extremely enthusiastic, very hands-on director, or rather in this case, producer, this is the first time that Hooper is doing a movie on this scale with special effects on this scale. And at the same time, Spielberg has just done this several times, like big special effects movies. Yeah, very successfully. Plus, he has George Lucas in his pocket with Industrial Light and Magic. He's got all the connections, and he's going to know, like, okay, this is how we got to set this shot up so that we can pull the special effects off properly. So, like, it's perfectly reasonable that he was consulting very heavily on a movie directed by a guy who prior to this was just making monster movies,
Yeah, that's it. And that's what's interesting. Like the outside and the inside of this movie, this is one of the lasting legacies of this movie we'll always have. And that's what I really, truly love. Like, its imprint on horror and cinema for like multiple different reasons. And I love that. And like you said as well, like, even the cast and crew were like almost sort of divided in regards to like, it's almost as if they were like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say at some points, because even Zelda Rubinstein, once again wrong, but I think she even said that all of her scenes were made by Spielberg. So
right.
like,
but you got to remember, like, Zelda Rubinstein's in the movie for like 15 minutes.
Yeah,
but like her presence in the movie looms very largely because
you think she's the whole fucking thing.
It's like the best 15 minutes of the movie. Her monologue, when she finally sort of like talks about how the afterlife works, like that's like one of the, it's first of all, that's my favorite scene in the entire movie. And it's like one of the sort of enduring monologues of not just like horror, but just cinema in general, like American movies. It's one of the, like, the coolest ever.
She was also really loyal to Steven Spielberg because he had written this role specifically for a little person and for a woman, and she was so accustomed to getting roles that were like a little bit exploitative or where she was kind of a humorous character, I guess. And so she really was very moved that he would take the time to actually write this role for someone like her. So when it came time to like picking sides, I guess she was really fiercely on his side. So I think that's kind of how it came down, is there were people that were like, no, we love Steven Spielberg, the man and the creative. And then there were other people that were just kind of like, I don't know. Don't ask me questions about who directed this. I'm the caterer. I don't know.
Yeah, like who wants to get on the bad side of Spielberg? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, do you want a career in Hollywood? Yeah, absolutely. Who are you going to side with? Toby Hooper or Tobe Hooper, they might know him as, or Steven Spielberg. But yeah, like, so to backtrack a little bit.
Toby Hooper didn't have he had sort of a gruff personality too. I think Steven Spielberg was a lot more charismatic and gentler, and Toby Hooper was he was not a people person. He was very much behind the camera guy. And so I think
we've done a couple of Hooper movies like on the pod, and the general the theme, the vibe, the consistent stories that we've heard about him is that he's just a really, really weird guy who has a tendency to sort of like put the shot first. And so, and you know, Spielberg is just much more of a creative and like an actor's director, you know?
Yeah, that's it. But to backtrack a little bit, for those that don't know, and I'm sure everybody who loves Poltergeist does know, but if you don't, basically the running controversy of this is the fact that there's always been a running controversy that obviously this movie is Toby Hooper's movie. His name is on the on everything saying director, but Steven Spielberg. So at the time, from what I understand, Steven Spielberg wanted to make this movie. He wrote this movie, wanted to make it and direct it, but he was in contract to make E.T. I think that's possibly right. Could be, but I think he was in contract to make E.T. And then the studio wouldn't let him make Poltergeist. But obviously things were moving ahead with Poltergeist. And then obviously it was decided that he wouldn't make it. He would obviously make E.T. He was under contract to do that. So he couldn't make Poltergeist, but the running controversy of it was that behind the scenes, Toby Hooper was almost like a fucking cover-up marriage, you know what I mean? Like, where it was almost like Toby Hooper, name is on this, but it was Spielberg that really created it. And like you were saying earlier, like, I don't believe that. Like, I don't think, like, it's when I watch this movie, I felt like I'm always watching it with like two separate like brains and eyes. Like, I feel like I can almost pick out the bits that are Spielberg and pick out the bits that are Toby Hooper. And it's really weird when I watch it because I'm like, Spielberg is Spielberg and he does like dark stuff, but he doesn't go so dark, apart, you know, like crazy dark in a lot of his movies. Like, not like to the points where there are moments in Poltergeist where it's very horror heavy. And those are the moments where I'm like, that's from the brain of like Toby Hooper. You know, that's sort of, when I'm watching those moments, I'm like, that feels like a little bit less Spielberg. But then you have the journey that we're on, and obviously, you know, we're getting to all the movie and that, but we're on the journey with this family, and that feels very Spielberg. And it's a weird mixture of both of these things where you have these really great family moments that feels very like Spielberg. And as I said, you start on this journey and you follow this journey, and you're so happy to be on this journey with these great characters, and they feel like great characters that Spielberg would have created. But then you've got the really like the moments that, like, as a kid and even as an adult, where you're like, fucking hell, like, that doesn't feel Spielberg, because it feels so dark and gritty, and obviously that's what becomes the, you know, the controversy once again about this is not a fucking kids movie. So it's so fucking mental, this movie, because I just think to myself, because even now I'm sitting here and I'm like, I feel like I'm never really going to know, because, you know, like, people are going to back Toby Hooper, people are going to back Spielberg. I feel like we're only going to know, I don't know how we're going to know, but it's so interesting. Yeah.
It's a very weird, very polarizing production. Like, you know, the script is Spielberg. And that's another element as to why it feels like a Spielberg movie. He probably very deliberately brought in Hooper because he knows, like, he's a guy who sort of like knows the limits of his talent. and as talented as he is, he can't, he doesn't really feel like he has it in him to make the sort of horror movie that he wants out of this. And so he gets the guy who made Texas Chainsaw Massacre to do those, to sort of go to those places where he just, he doesn't have the chops.
I think visually it's very much a Tobe Hooper movie, especially in the way that a lot of it is lit. I think Tobe Hooper, he to the extent that he has like a signature thing, I think his lighting, his use of lighting, light and shadow in particular, it is a prominent theme throughout this movie. You can see obviously the vibe, the whole energy is a Steven Spielberg production because he wrote it, and it just kind of just reeks of his schmaltzy nostalgia. But visually, it is very much Tobe Hooper, and I think
the scene when they go into the closet, with the rope and all that, it's lit. It has all of the flickery stuff that he uses in the Funhouse. It's got the crazy like gel lighting that he uses in Eaten Alive. Like, it is stylistically 100% Hooper.
Yeah, and he was on. Yeah. He brought Hooper in because he was contractually bound to ET, but also that contract stipulated that he could only make one movie. He can only release one movie at a time, essentially, so he's not competing with himself at the box office. And so he was like, fine, I'll take the writer-producer credit. And he went out and got a horror guy specifically, because originally it was supposed to be, what was it called? Dark Skies, I think it was the original script.
This was supposed to be, because E.T. eventually splits off. And it was supposed to be, I believe, a sequel to Close Encounters.
Yeah.
That was called Dark Skies or Watch the Skies.
Something like that.
Which is
I
essentially
think it might have been Watch the Skies. Yeah, I think you're right.
It was supposed to be like an alien invasion movie that they just softened and turned into E.T. And he's like, well, I still want to make a horror movie.
Yeah. And so when Hooper got the script, he was like, nah, I don't really do sci-fi. It's not my thing. And so he kind of rewrote a lot of it to be more horror because he wanted Tobe Hooper and he wanted to make a horror movie. I think if Spielberg himself had made this, it wouldn't be a horror movie. I don't think he does horror in that way. I mean, Jaws, you could argue, is kind of a horror-ish movie, but like he'll do horror adjacent. But he needed someone who knew how to make a horror movie. And that is, so he wanted Tobe Hooper. So I think if you're right, we're never going to actually know. And I don't know that it really matters. It's a now, 40-year-old movie. But if he went that far to get Tobe Hooper specifically, I would imagine that he did not intentionally set out to undermine him. I think he just couldn't help himself. Like, I don't think you go to that extent. Just like, yeah. So I don't know if it's a shadow director thing. I think he really wanted this guy to make this movie. I think you're right. And I like the, obviously we get into talking about the movie now as well, but I really like the mention of how it feels really like a Tobe Hooper movie. Like there's moments in it, like I said, like where it does feel like a Tobe Hooper, like the ones you mentioned. And as well as that, like there's something about how, the bit where obviously she's in, the swimming pool, and obviously all these bodies, which obviously we'll talk about as well, with all these bodies and stuff, and that doesn't feel Spielberg. That feels the way that's shot. That feels, and there's some sort of like real grittiness, darkness to it, and that feels very Tobe Hooper as well. So it's really weird watching this movie because I feel like I'm watching it and I'm picking out bits. When you have this in my head and I'm like Spielberg, Hooper, I'm like picking out little bits where I'm like, I feel like I know who did this and who did that. But then ultimately, it all sort of works together, and it just creates this like fantastic movie. So like you said, like after all this time, it doesn't really fucking really matter who did it, because like we got this, and that's ultimately all that matters. But I liked that you spoke about like things about the lighting, and that's one of the things as well, that this is a genuinely, truly like beautiful movie. Like this is definitely a product of 80s cinema, visually and aesthetically, but it is a very, very like really good looking movie, which obviously once again, whoever was part of the creating, the movie and shooting it and so on, like that's full credit to them. And there are moments where it feels Spielberg and Hooper, but like you mentioned, the lighting is absolutely stunning in this movie. Like just every scene is just lit to perfection, whether it's, the daylight scenes where
the things are happening in the house, and we're starting the journey with his family. And then as the movie goes on, obviously gradually the movie is getting darker in tone, as story and aesthetically. And then we start getting, the lighting in these night shots and so on like that is absolutely stunning. We get that old school look where it's like wide angle lenses, which always is something that is like, I just love the use of old school camera lenses where they're showing everything, rather than just having a close up. Like now everything's just point and shoot, but back then there was a reason as to why everything was set up the way it was. And there are moments in Poltergeist where you've got this wide angle lens, but you're looking in the background to see if you can find something. And we sort of don't really get that as much anymore. But yeah, so
all these guys wanted to be John Ford, and so they all were aping his technique.
Well, what's weird is that it's the guy who shot this is his name's Matthew Leonetti. He's consistently worked, I think, since probably the late 70s. I don't know if he's still alive, but his filmography reads very much like a journeyman camera guy. Like, it's just weird stuff. It's like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Ice Pirates, Commando. It's like there's nothing. He doesn't have like a distinct aesthetic, and yet he shot this movie like expertly. It is very well filmed. And he just sort of like seems like one of those guys. Like, if you want someone who's very good at this and is technically proficient, he's one of them, I guess. But yeah, there's nothing about it. Like, when we did The Warriors at Funhouse, you can look at those movies and be like, oh, that's Andrew Laszlo who shot that stuff. Like, you can tell who the cinematographer is. But this, like, I would never, if I didn't actually look this up, I wouldn't really know who this guy is. And yet the movie is shot beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many great shots in this. Like obviously at the end, the house sort of like imploding, going in on itself. Like, not only is it an iconic shot, but it's just created and looks like so fucking good. Like, even to this day, even watching it on 4K, you're like, what a great looking shot that is. And it really delivers the impact that it's trying to do, like visually and aesthetically, and of the moment that it is. And it just, once again, like, felt like something, obviously as a kid, like I'd never seen it before, and then now I still watch it, I'm like, wow, what a great scene. But then also, of course, one of my favorite scenes, if not my favorite shot scene, is the long, ever expanding sort of hallway shot.
Oh yeah, and that's outstanding. Shot, it's like a reverse dolly zoom on a it's so, God, that's such a great shot.
Exactly, and that's what I love about like this movie. And then it sort of lends itself to sort of the Spielberg side of it, where there are so many moments in these sort of old school movies that I struggle to feel like we get it so much anymore, where everything feels like a screenshot. Like, you can take a screenshot of that moment, and then you could just have it as a fucking picture or a poster on your wall, and you're like, how, like, that. This is what I love about cinematography, like, in the 70s and the 80s. Just everything felt so purposeful, and everything was created to expand the story and the idea and the concept of like what's happening with it, but also to go like, we want to create a visual journey for people to be on as well. And like Poltergeist is definitely one of those where you're taking on the journey through the story, but you're taking on a crazy visual journey as well. And that's why, like, how it all works together is what like always blows my mind every time I watch Poltergeist. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, there's numerous scenes like that. I mean, it really does have like a bunch wide shots, close shots. Like, one of my favorites is the scene where Nelson and James Karen go up to the top of the valley to sort of look over the new development, and there's that crazy matte painting of the cemetery off to like the left of the frame. It's amazing. Like, no cemetery on Earth looks like that, but it does in Poltergeist.
They're all these guys that are, making movies coming out of the 70s and into the 80s. They're also heavily influenced by Hitchcock, by John Ford, and by Bergman. And so, like, you can see each of those directors has such a distinct style and are so meticulous about everything. Like, when you're saying that each thing feels like a very well composed single shot, I think that's the Hitchcock influence. It's like, if you watch his movies, you could pull any of these and it's like, well, there's your poster image right there. Like, each thing is so specific, and they spent so much time storyboarding all this stuff out. And I don't I mean, I don't know that people still, obviously those are still big influences, but I don't think it's the same anymore where they're not, they're not watching these classic films. I think it's a little bit different, and that's why we don't see this so much anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, and that's why I get like really sad, because obviously outside of all this, like everybody know that, like, so filmmaking and acting is what I want to do outside of all of this and always has, and my influence is always from the past, and it's very, very rarely from the present. And that's what's like really sad about a lot of it now, is that every now and again you will get movies that have this, fantastic, like you said, like meticulous cinematography, like everything feel personable, like something, say like The Substance, for example. Like that is a movie that, like it or not, but as on a a filmmaking impact, on a visual aesthetic style, everything is very meticulous, and any references, it doesn't hide it. It wears it on open out for everyone to see its references, Shining and so on. And I really, that's one of the things I took away from, say, like The Substance, is I was like, wow, like we finally got a modern day movie that cares about creating, like I said, those screenshots, and it was nice watching a movie like that. And I feel like that's almost secondary now, and that's my concern about where like horror is. That's where cinema is at the moment, where every now and again you'll get a movie that you go, oh, okay, like now it makes me remember of the impact of what cinematography has, as well as the story and the journey that we're on both of them together. And like I said, like we got that so much when we had Poltergeist and so on. They're the movies where I look back on and go, wow, what a journey it is in the story, and then on an aesthetical journey we're on as well. And I feel like you were saying, it's so meticulous, but yet we don't really get that as much anymore. And I always get really sad when I watch movies. I'm like, what a really good movie, but it looks like shit.
Yeah. There's plenty. There's a lot of modern stuff, but that has like an eye on that. Like, but so much of it is aided by visual effects, and it has a tendency to look like VFX when you watch them. Like Nosferatu is like visually stunning, a very arresting movie. But watching it, I can't help but notice like so much of it is just created in a computer, and that does a lot to kind of dampen that, because so much of like the technology just didn't exist reliably back then. Like the closest we got to that, I think, same year was Tron, and like most of the stuff that people think is computer effects in Tron was like done in camera and on the set with set dressing that was meant to look like a computer. So like a lot of this stuff, the charm of the movies of this age is that it's all handmade by like people who are just expert craftsmen in their field. So, there's just a different look to it. It has, it still has like, bits and pieces of old Hollywood to it. Where now you can just whip it up. And I mean, there's something to be said about that today. It's just, it's not as charming to me.
And every film is shot in the goddamn dark.
Also true.
That's it.
Also true.
Everybody's too afraid to shoot everything in the light. Yeah, that's it. And that's once again mentioning Substance. That was what was good about The Substance, because where they went very practical on that movie, it meant that they could shoot things and wanted to shoot things to show it off. Because like you said, and this is one of the big things with practical effects, or trying to champion practical effects, is that it's true artistry that's actually being created by real people who are artists, putting it into a movie, and they want to showcase their artistry. And also that then lends itself to, well, we can try this, we can try that. And that's what obviously a lot of it was back in the 70s and the 80s, and obviously before that and around that time, where they were creating what practical effects is, and evolving practical effects constantly all the time. So when it went from like this year, then they were like, shit, now we can do this in this year, and then this year we can do this, and it was constantly evolving. And like you said, like there's so much charm to that, and it's something so exciting about that. And Poltergeist, I think it does a really, really good job at blending all the practical effects that they had, but also really doing a good job at creating sort of like the visual effects, because obviously this is 82, so they didn't have CGI, so everything was all done on print and so on like that. And when I watch this movie now, there is that charm to it where you're like some of it might not look great, but who fucking cares? Because somebody had to do that. Like, yeah, of course, somebody sits down now, smashes the shit out of a keyboard, and something appears. A dinosaur appears on the screen, but. And there is artistry to that, but like the fact that we used to watch movies where people like spent fucking months creating something in a warehouse with a team, is absolutely like there's so much enjoyment that you get out of these movies by watching them and then knowing, hang on, somebody created that, and then that's what's great is modern day. If we do actually get that in movies, that's another reason why people like want to go to see those movies, because you're like, I want to see the artistry that people have created for that movie. And once again, feels like something a little bit of a lost time ago.
Yeah,
which is a shame.
Yeah. You still, we're definitely seeing a return to that. As much as like young filmmakers can do that. Like, we just recently did Barbarian for our Patreon series, and that was one of Zach Kreger's like stated goals, was like, if this technology was not available to John Carpenter, then I'm not going to use it, which is admirable, you know?
Yeah. It's and that's the thing as well. When you get those moments in modern day movies, you appreciate it and you respect it so much more, that even if the film itself, like there's been so many movies that I'm like, that's not a great movie, but then the artistry that goes into creating what you're seeing on screen, then you can't help but admire and respect that as well. But this was, like I said, Poltergeist was from a time when that's what it was, and they were constantly creating real things and constantly evolving. And I really do think that Poltergeist, so part of me feels like that was like a really good time where they were like trying out things, and really like it felt very well integrated into this movie. Like there's nothing in this movie that stands out where you're like, that looks very, very shit. Like there are moments, like even like one of the main scenes where the guy's ripping his face off. You're like, when you watch it now, exactly. You're like, oh my, like it's not. Your brain is so different to when you were a kid, and when you're a kid, you're watching it and you're like, that some fucking bastard's ripping his fucking face off. That's gross.
That scene scarred me so hard. Like when I saw it, that was because it was like what Dave was talking about. Like, well, it's a PG rated movie, and it completely fooled my mom. And then some dude rips his own face off, and I was just like aghast at like 10 years old, just like what am I like? Am I going to be able to finish this movie?
Yeah. When I watched, when I put this on for my daughter for the first time, I said nothing, and I just wanted to see sort of her reactions in those moments. She's very twisted as well. So that moment, she was just like, how cool is that? Like she'll see moments like that, and then she's just like, that's so fucking cool. And it doesn't faze her, but like there's little moments in this movie that I always sit there and I watch her, because I'm like, I want to know how she reacts to these sort of moments. And I remember her looking at me and just like, I think she sort of gets it even at her age, that somebody made that, and then she's just, that is what gets her, where she's like, wow, how cool is it that somebody made that, and how fucked up it is, but somebody made it. And I think that's what I love watching movies with her, because it just means like a film like Poltergeist is one where she just wants to go back to all the time, because she wants to try and find other little bits where she's like, how cool's that? How cool's that? So it's great watching movies with her, but it is a movie that what I loved about showing her, that when I was watching it and with her, it reminds me of like, obviously when I was a kid watching it for the first time, it's nice watching it with her. But then when I was just like, this is still a movie that like feels like it's going to live on past like her, like she's going to show this to her kids, and it doesn't feel like a film that's going to like time is going to make it obsolete. It doesn't feel like that type of movie. I mean, I'm sure something will in the future, in like 200 years or whatever, but it does feel like a moment in cinema and in horror where like it was like a family friendly sort of horror, like Gremlins and so on, like that had those darker elements, darker moments. Obviously, Poltergeist has some very dark moments, but it doesn't feel like it ever goes too far where you're like, oh no, switch this off because they're going to shit themselves in their bed tonight.
Yeah.
So there's so many great moments. But yeah, so obviously going into a little bit more detail about the film itself. We're obviously speaking about the cinematography and so on. This film is a visually stunning movie, and it really works well with what the journey we're on with the Freeling family in this. But the score itself is so good. Iconic, like Jerry Goldsmith, create Gremlins, The Omen, Rambo, Total Recall, The Mummy, The Burbs. I mean, that's just some of them. But he's another person, like John Williams. As soon as you hear a Jerry Goldsmith score, you're like, I know I'm in good hands. Like there's something about a Jerry, and it makes you feel really fucking good inside when you get to hear a Jerry Goldsmith score.
Oh yeah, and the thing about him, we've talked about Jerry Goldsmith a good deal on our pod because he shows up like in places that you never expect, but like. When you hear like John Williams, you're hearing a John Williams score. You can identify the motifs immediately.
Because you're hearing the John Williams score. The dude has like one motif that he goes back to over and over again.
But Goldsmith is so dynamic. Like this movie, it has the sort of like syrupy Steven Spielberg cues. It's got the sort of the big sort of dramatic string swells at the important parts, but like this movie is worlds away from Alien, which he also did, which is a menacing rumble of a soundtrack from like start to finish. Guys,
I think he's one of those composers that I think sees in his head. He sort of understands he understands visuals in a musical language, so he can quickly ascertain what a scene needs. And because he's so versatile and dynamic, he's able to produce it so quickly. Because this is a guy who he was a session musician in like, I think the early 60s in Hollywood. He was mostly jazz. And so he kind of learned from all these like session musicians just how to deliver what everybody wanted. And he's so good at it, but he has his own style. I think he is, next to Bernard Herrmann, I think he is the greatest American composer for film.
Yeah, that's it's high praise, but it's something that he fully deserves and I really like that you mentioned that because I genuinely feel the same thing every time. Like it almost feels like he's a filmmaker that truly, like you were mentioning, like he truly understands film and what the film is trying to be. So in those moments, it's like almost as if he's the director of the visuals, but he's putting the sound to those visuals and he manages to do it perfectly. Like in Gremlins, for example, we've got the classic Gremlins theme and so on, but it's just the little moments in Gremlins where you've got, like he's not trying to overscore it. Like he's not like, I'm fucking Jerry Goldsmith, I'm Bobby Big fucking Bollocks, and I'm going to be, everybody needs to know my score from like track 1 to track fucking 100, Like it just feels like he purposely goes, right, like let's look at this scene and I'm going to create the perfect score for this scene. And he does it like all the time. So like when you're watching it, there are moments when, and I always see this as a credit to his work, that I'm never really taking out of a movie by his music. I'm never like, oh, there's that theme again. You know what I mean? Like I feel like every time I'm watching a scene in a movie that he's created the music for, it just adds to how you're supposed to feel about the scene itself. And then also it can bring out the absolute like iconic like themes. So he can go big and he can go small, but it's whatever is purposeful for the movie. He's so good. I love Jerry Goldsmith. He's such a great composer.
One of the all-time greatest, no question.
Absolutely. So as well as that, obviously going into great visuals, great sound. Now this is one of the other things that's always big that I talk about on the show, but also this is one of the prime examples of a movie that handles this very well, and that is performances. Now there are a lot of characters in this movie, but the performances in this movie are so good. They are so of that time. Craig T. Nelson, like, there is no vanity to his performance whatsoever, like in this movie. Like he's just there pushing his gut out. He's there sweating a fucking mess. Like they've given him like the panda eyes and so on like that. Like it's his performance in this is like quintessential, like you were saying, like 80s, like where it is purely about, once again, every single thing that happens in a movie like this has to aid the story, has to aid the characters. And once again, it goes back to a lot of, once again, I feel like we're missing in modern day cinema and horror, is where we used to always get characters. Every person in this movie is their own person, and it feels like they've lived a life before the movie that we're watching and then where they're still living the life, and we're on this journey with them for that moment in their lives that so happened to be filmed and put on screen. That's how I always feel about like movies like this, where every actor that was on this movie, they just come in, they bring their A game, and they're like, okay, so this is who I am, this is who I was, this is who I am, and they're so good. So like Craig T. Nelson is absolutely like brilliant. He looks like shit in this, but he's brilliant. Zelda Rubinstein, like you mentioned earlier, like you bring somebody like that into it, and she just elevates the movie to become like something you didn't know that it could be. And that's the thing. This film throws so many curveballs in so many different ways, and then they do that with the performances. Even the kids. Normally, we know kids can be fucking annoying kids, but even they're good in it. You know, there's so much. There's so many good performances. Obviously, the wife in it as well. Absolutely. Although I'm always convinced that she's way younger than what he is, and I'm like, how did that happen? But yeah, performances wise in this, like everybody's so good in this movie, and it reminds me of when it was like that. And then once again, it just does everything to help you enjoy the journey you're on even more. It's just so good performances in this one.
Yeah,
there's also no big stars in this movie. Like you could not drop like Faye Dunaway into this movie because she would have been too big. She's also a kind of a lunatic. But there's the fact that they're so believable. Nobody's trying to upstage anybody. If anything, maybe Zelda Rubinstein's a little, she's giving it a little much, maybe. But
well, she's designed to be
she's
big,
supposed to.
You know.
Yeah. There's no big name, and so I think that you're right. There's not a lot of vanity. There's not a lot of ego involved in this. They're just all there, top of their game, doing their role, and they're so believable. They feel like an authentic family. Where if you put big names into these roles, that would be a little bit distracting.
Yeah. At its heart, this movie is a family drama, so it's absolutely critical that the family feel like a family. And I think honestly, there is one weak spot. The character of Dana probably could have been cut. You'd have the same movie.
They basically did cut her. She fucks off in like 10 minutes into the movie. You don't see it again until the end.
But that's what's funny. Because literally every time I watch this movie, I honestly forget that there's an older sister. Like every fucking time, I'm like, oh fuck, how bad's that? I feel really bad every time because I'm like, she's in this movie. I forget every time.
Yeah, but Craig Nelson and Jo Beth Williams have like tremendous chemistry, and again, it's that Spielberg touch where he puts these like moments in that don't really advance the plot at all, but they convince you that these people, like, they have a relationship, they love one another. It's like that scene where they're in their bedroom, like smoking weed, just fucking around on the bed. Like it's that scene which does so much to really sort of sell you on the rest of the movie that, like, yeah, this is an integrated family who are real, you know. So it goes a long way, because like if it were anybody else, like it wouldn't have been the same.
Well, and that's the Tobe Hooper and Spielberg, that's that dynamic that works really well, is that Tobe Hooper probably doesn't understand families and children, or didn't rather, in the same way that Steven Spielberg does. He has a knack for really getting who kids are and what kids, what the sort of interiority of these people and what their lives are like. Tobe Hooper probably doesn't. But at the same time, Tobe Hooper knows how to effectively film someone ripping their face off, whereas Steven Spielberg probably doesn't.
Yeah,
or absolutely. He doesn't know how to convey that feeling.
I mean, a year before he had a Nazi's face melt off. So I mean, he's got the chops.
But it's not to the same effect. It doesn't inspire horror. You cheer when the Nazi's face melts off.
Sure,
yeah.
Well, I don't know about these days. Maybe they don't cheer so much. But but I think
you're right.
That's where he comes in. It's like, he's the horror guy. He knows how to do all of that. And it doesn't always work. The two of them, sometimes it does feel very much at odds with each other. Especially there's the back half of this movie, or maybe the last quarter of it, feels like a different movie.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always work together, but they do seem to complement one another really well.
Yeah, you're right. And that's exactly what I mean. Like when I'm watching it, it's such a weird experience because you've got the Spielberg family driven drama, so to speak. And then you've got the moments that feel genuinely like a full Toby Hooper horror. And it's such a weird, like, monster of an amalgamation of like those two completely different directors. Like I said, but like somehow managed to like work it together. And then it creates this, but which feels like, even to this day, when I watch Poltergeist, it still feels really fresh as a film. I don't know what it is. Like, even though it's in 82, when I watch Poltergeist, like now, like literally watching it a couple of days ago to do the prep for this, even now, I'm like, even though this was 82, it still feels as a movie, as a family, driven movie, and then the horror that takes place in it. I still feel like this is still like one of the movies that does it best. Like, this is one of the movies that really still to this day, I'm like, they need to still work at this. Like even though this is 82, they still need to figure out this because it blends so perfectly. And whether that is because it was from two different brilliant minds, who make two completely different style of movies. I don't know, maybe we should be fucking doing that more. Maybe we should be getting this director and just putting them in a fucking room and being like, look, just figure this shit out together and seeing what happens. Like, I'd love to see more of that. If it means that we get more movies. I do not disagree.
I did.
Well, at the time, they weren't allowed to do that at the time. It was the Directors Guild only allowed for one person to be listed as a director. That's why there was always only one director. Now you see it a lot more. Like, I think Joel and Ethan Coen were the ones that were pretty instrumental in changing that because they direct together a lot of the time. So now you see people, like groups of people directing, like Radio Silence and people like that. But at the time, you could only have one. And you also had a lot of auteurs who probably didn't want more than one.
But there was way too much ego involved in those guys. Like you could never put a guy like Stanley Kubrick up with somebody else. No,
exactly. You can imagine that if Stanley Kubrick like was just there on set and they're like after like take 200 and the other guy is like, I'm not sure we need another one, and he's just like, yeah, we're doing another one. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work at all. Yeah. But what's great about this is that, like, what is really great about the performances in this is that this movie is constantly escalating, but it escalates like almost like it goes from 1 to 10 like immediately. Like, there are moments in it where you're following this journey with these great performances and this family, and you really enjoy your time with this family, and then next thing you know, a tree's eating a fucking kid. And then, like, you're like, what the fuck's going on? And, like, you're completely taken off guard. And then you've got, like, the little lower game. But then next thing you know, it goes straight to 10 again. And you're like, what the fuck? And, obviously, it's expertly crafted. And obviously, it's purposeful to do that. But it's great to see that the performances that, as you go through the movie, their performances change to what is happening with the movie and how how the movie escalates. Their performances escalate to what it should be as well. Like, once again, like, the more I talk about this movie, the more I watch it, the more you pick out the moments in it where you're like, okay, so performances, but then it goes with this, and then this, and then it goes with this, and then you're like, I can't find things that are wrong with it. Like, it's so good.
Yeah, like, I mean, it gets a little wobbly towards the end, but no, this is this is a 5-star movie for me, like 100%, absolutely. I never get tired of it. It's like comfort food, Yeah,
it genuinely is one of those movies that every time I watch it, I get taken back to the time when I watched it for the first time as a kid. But then I'm like, even now, I'm like, I wish they were sort of making more of this, because it just works on every level. But like you mentioned as well, I think that's one of the only. There's not many issues or problems that I have with this movie. If I have any, I think it might possibly be the runtime, because, like you said, like the problem. I think this is like over 2 hours, isn't it? I think it's like 2 hours 14, something like that. I can't remember, or something like that. It's like 2 hours or so. But you get to a point in a movie where you almost think it's coming to an end, but then it starts up again, and you're like, oh shit, I'm back on it again. And you're like, I don't know how well that works sometimes. But then at the same time, when you go back into what it does then become, and then the way the movie ends, and you're like, oh, okay, like I'm happy that that's there, because if you took that out, well, then like we wouldn't have the iconography of like the house and so on like that, or like the end scene at the motel where he moves the TV out and so on like that, and it's a nice little touch. And you're like, you know, you take the runtime, suck that out of the runtime, but then you miss more iconic moments like that. So although you're like, it can be like a little bit long, at the same time you take stuff out and then you ruin what Poltergeist is.
I think those last moments, that the story resolves itself, and then there's like 20 minutes of it left, and I think that's where you really start to run into the problem. And I would guess that a lot of the reason for including that is because of those scenes and those visual moments. They were probably like, this is just too good to leave out. But it, like, you finish the movie and then you're like, wait, why is it still going? What's happening now? And you have to do it all again.
It's like, did we just resolve this?
Well, and it's such a big, that the scene where they get Carol Ann back, that whole moment, which is quite long, it is an epic scene on every level. And then you're sort of like, you're a little bit spent after that, and then it starts again, and you're like, well, how are you going to compare? You can't. How do you follow that? And the problem is that you can't. And so you have this sort of like second resolution that's a little bit weaker, even though it has those like iconic moments. You know, you move the stones, but you didn't move the bodies, like that type of thing. It has those moments, but you're like, hey, we just did all of this. Why are we doing it again?
Because it was so much fun.
And
they were like, even when they were making it, they were like, this is too much fucking fun to end.
It's unsatisfying because you're like, but we just got this. This just feels unnecessary to me.
Yeah, but that's the like, a lot of these guys were also sort of taking cues from British horror, which always had that sort of all hell breaks loose ending. Like, these guys all love Nigel Neal. To such a point where they were like recruiting him to help them make movies. Like, Hooper does it.
Nigel Neal hated all of them.
And then Nigel Neal hated it. And then like John Carpenter did it in Prince of Darkness, where he tried to give him sort of a kind of a reference and a bit of a tip of the hat, which again Nigel Neal hated. But like, they all loved the Quatermass stuff, which always has that like crazy big explosive finale, which is what this movie has.
Twice.
That's two of them.
Two of them. And it's another moment as well that South Park has fucking ruined a horror movie for me, because basically, I don't know if you guys watch South Park or anybody listening, but there's Terrifier 3 recently. I was the only one that was sitting in a cinema. I don't know if you've seen Terrifier 3, but there is a moment that involves, I won't say anything, that involves a rat. And I could not stop but have the fucking Lemmy-Winks theme in my head when I was watching it. It was doing my head in that I was sitting there trying to watch a serious, like, sort of horror movie sort of thing, and I'm just sitting in my head hearing Lemmy-Winks, and I was like, for fuck's sake. But this film now every time that they come out of that and they've got like the jelly on them, I can't help but think of Randy sitting there saying, "Did you see the ghost? The ectoplasm from the ghost?" And so I'm fucking sick. South Park just keep on ruining horror movies for me. So now I just sit there trying to laugh to myself. When I was watching Terrifier 3, I was laughing my head off, and everybody thought I was fucking mental. And I'm like, no, it was Lemmy-Winks. Sorry, it was just Lemmy-Winks. But yeah, there's just, you're right. It's funny. It's like having two endings, and then once again it becomes about, but do you take that out? No, and I don't ever want to, because we get what we get, and so on. But it is one of those things where you're like, that's one of my only things of it, where I'm like, if you've only got that thing to take out of it, then like you're saying, like, this is genuinely like a 5-star masterpiece of a movie. That also, this is the thing with time, isn't it? Like obviously it's constantly moving, it's constantly going, and there are moments or movies that sort of fall out of where we're going in time, you know. And I feel like Poltergeist is one of those at the moment, where it doesn't really get, like, within a horror community and so on, Poltergeist is like, you know, a love movie. Outside of the horror community, it's not really known so much anymore, unless, you know, you're like, you know, our age and so on like that. And it is a movie of its time, but there is so much still to enjoy and love about this movie. And like we're saying, like, you know, this is genuinely a 5-star movie. That it is a shame that a movie like this feels like it's something of the past now, even though we should still be talking about it of the present. because it's so fucking good and I love it. And also, for once, a dog doesn't die, which is brilliant. Because as soon as you see a dog,
they send the dog away just to ensure that doesn't happen.
I know, exactly. Like that's like when they do that every time, I'm like, what a great moment where they purposely send the dog away because they're like, just so everybody knows, the dog isn't going to die. We're going to send him in his little taxi wherever he's going, and then that's it. And I love it. So yeah. So I mean, look, you know, as a movie, we go through our overall thoughts in a minute after some production info and so on like that. But we've spoken a lot about the production info and the facts and so on as well. But there's not. I was going to say there's too much to love about this movie, but there's never too much to love about a movie. It's nice that we have a movie like this that has so much to talk about in regards to like what we're actually watching, what's on screen. But then outside of it, we get the extra bonus of going, it's a fucking shit show, really. And that's always really exciting when we get movies like this. Production info and fact-wise, as I said, we've spoken about some. One of them that I've got was that Drew Barrymore herself auditioned to play Carol Ann, but Spielberg basically thought she'd better off more suited to E.T. So, and I think, you know, the performance that we get obviously in Poltergeist is right for the movie. I don't know. It's one of those things, like if you have somebody like Drew Barrymore in it, she would be great in it, but is she too much for it? And that's the other thing, you like you were saying earlier on, like if you have a bigger name or somebody that is, you know, that can act a scene like the way that she does, like it could be taking it too far. And what we get, I think, from the performance for Carol Ann in it and so on is absolutely genuinely like perfect for this movie, because it is a weird little movie and there are some weird performances in it, and I think she really works into that really, really well. We've already gone through it loads, so there's no really any big point to go through it, but obviously we know the confusion over whether Spielberg actually directed it. You know, some of the cast are saying that it was Spielberg, some of the cast are saying it's not. There's been articles fucking everywhere, but for me it's just nice knowing that it's there and it is something just like another talking point to a movie. But one of the other things that we haven't really spoken about is that some people believe that this movie and the franchise might actually be cursed. If you believe in that bullshit, it might be cursed. There's a fine line between cursed and coincidence.
So the thing about the Poltergeist cursed is everybody kind of makes it sound like you know, they made this movie and then like everybody died, but really
the next day,
but like Heather O'Rourke died, I think, during the production of Poltergeist 3 in 1988.
Yeah.
So there's like 6 years between that. It's also attributed to Julian Beck, who I believe had cancer.
He had cancer at the time. Like he died when they were making the second one, I think.
Yeah, part 2, because he's Henry Kane. And then Dominique
he was
Dunn.
also like 80.
Yeah, and then Dominique Dunn was unfortunately murdered. But like this all happened like years after.
Yeah, it wasn't on set.
Yeah. So it's just I don't know. I don't really go for the curse thing.
It's one of those things where they're just it's trying to leave a lasting or a bigger imprint of what the iconography of what horror is, and then they're trying to add those little things to it. But like you mentioned as well, so like Heather O'Rourke, who played obviously Carol Ann, she died at the age of 12 of cardiac arrest and septic shock. Stemming from a misdiagnosed intestinal stenosis before Poltergeist 3 was released. Dominique Dunn, Dana, was murdered by her ex-boyfriend, which is fucking horrible, 5 months after the film's release. Julian Beck, who played Kane in the sequel, died of cancer while shooting the film. He was aware of his condition when he signed up. Will Sampson, who played Taylor in the sequel, died of kidney failure a year after that film's release. And then all of obviously these rumours and these deaths and everything like that has led to the rumour that the production was haunted. And obviously, on top of all of this,
they're all terribly unfortunate, but like they're also, for the most part, with the exception of Dominique Dunn, they were natural. You know, it was just disease. Disease got these poor.
And
people.
obviously, one of the things that a lot of people believe that the curse started because they used actual skeletons on the set. and then they're like, that's it, like this is what you get, reap what you sow, you know, like you use real skeletons on the set. And that's one of the things, if people don't know, that the scene where what's the mother's name? Is it Dana? No, is it? What's the mother's name? I always forget.
Diane.
That's
Diane
it. I'm so fucking bad with names. But Diane, when she goes into the swimming pool and it's all filling up and you see the bodies. I mean, as a kid, I had no fucking clue. As an adult, when you're like, oh, if they're real, that's pretty fucked up. But apparently it was cheaper to get real skeletons than it was to get fake ones. So they got real ones and then put it in there. And I don't think they even told her that they were real skeletons. Now, this is all whether this is true.
Oh, it is. It is absolutely.
Oh,
true.
It is true. So it is true. So they actually. So basically, in that scene, that's fucked up, isn't it? They're real dead bodies, real skeletons that she's swimming around in. I don't think they told her. And then that's one of the reasons why they're saying that that's part of the curse.
It's actually, it's something they used to do a lot, because if it's, and I don't know if it was that they were more expensive so much as like they would have had to have made them. And so it's just easier to buy these sort of medical, because what they're buying is like medical school subjects, I guess. It's like, these are the same things that you would use for that purpose for, you can't, I mean, we can't go buy a body, but like you can, at the time you could do that. And they used to do it in the 50s and 60s all the time, because it was like, they didn't really have a lot of special effects people. And it was just, they didn't have the same sentimentality, I guess. But yeah, if that was the case, like you didn't, if this movie is cursed because of it, then there's about 700 other movies that should be cursed as well.
Yeah, for real. When I die, donate my body to Hollywood.
Yep.
Yeah. Just make it into the like a reboot of Poltergeist and just put my body in there or something.
Oh
like that.
God, they did reboot Poltergeist.
Imagine if that was a card that we had to carry around rather than like a body donor. It was like, please give my body to Hollywood. Like,
oh yeah. I think like
if specific,
like if found dead, delivered to Tom Savini.
Yeah, that's what I want. Give my body to George Lucas.
You get to choose your director. Like that's it. You have like a thing, or like you can choose between one or two directors. What a fucking weird world that would be. But I want it. I want a world like that, because put me in a Spielberg movie when I'm dead. Although to be fair, you might get loads of people who like off themselves sooner because they're like, I'm in a Spielberg movie.
Send me off to Savini, and he'd be like, "Finally, I win."
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So really quickly, obviously we've spoken a lot about the movie, but from each of you, your overall thoughts on what Poltergeist is and the legacy it is.
It's I would say Poltergeist is a really, really great vector to introduce younger viewers to horror in a way that it's truly a horrifying horror movie that you could get away with showing kids. I don't know how modern young people might react to it. It's an older movie, obviously, but I feel like a lot of the stuff that they produce today that's made for younger people tends to be really soft, and not very scary, or it's like like YouTube ARG stuff that's not not really scary. It relies on really kind of boring tropes. Like this is a movie that's like, it's a horror movie that you could show to a young person to sort of see if it would like foster their like a journey into the genre and fandom in a way that in a really meaningful way that kind of sticks with them. It worked for me, but like I was already kind of there. But like at the same time, my personal experience with it was very much that. It was like, oh, I'm watching a real horror movie. I'm watching the one that everybody was quoting at the time. So it was an important one for me. Maybe it works for them. Maybe it works for them kids too.
I think it in terms of its legacy, this one redefined the ghost story for Hollywood. Like until I'm going to say mid 70s, but early 80s, it was gothic. They were gothic stories, gothic tropes, and this one takes it and puts it in a very different setting. And I think that's why we have things like The Conjuring and all those kind of Blumhouse. Ed and Lorraine Warren movies, but you get those because of this. If without this, there wouldn't be those movies. This is the one that sort of redefines what a ghost story and a haunting story is in America. And it's also just a great movie. I mean, with the exception of that last part, I think we could pack that off. But generally, everybody, you get the best of the best, and everybody is at the top of their game. That's why the movie endures. It's like, these were the best people in Hollywood, and they're all working at their absolute best. And you get a movie that, you know, it is head and shoulders above just about anything else that was coming out at the time, in terms of horror anyway. And so that's why it endures, is that it's more than a horror movie, and it's really, really well made.
Yeah, absolutely. And you both absolutely spot on, like with what you're saying, Brian, as well, with the fact that when you watch this movie as a kid and as an adult, you genuinely, this isn't a horror. It doesn't feel like a horror adjacent movie. It is a horror movie. And that's what I truly love about it, is that it is truly a horror movie, but yet somehow is for kids. And yet, as an adult, it has it for everything. Like, as an adult, you can still watch this and go, this is a fucking great horror movie. But as a kid, you will literally shit yourself watching this movie and going, this could be my first actual fucking horror movie. Mm-hmm. And there's something so special about this movie and how it does that, that I think the importance of that is something that is almost something that for me should be studied on, in regards to, like, look, like the Poltergeist did this and it created something that felt like it hadn't been done before. And it's still to this day, like I mentioned earlier on, I still feel like this is like almost a blueprint of going, if you're going to make a film that's for the family, that yet is still horror. Like you mentioned earlier on, like everything feels very watered down now, and a horror is like more horror adjacent. It might have something like, if you watch, like, say, like the Goosebumps that is on Disney, I watch it and I'm like, that's not fucking horror, but it's, you know what I mean? But you put something like Poltergeist from 1982 on, and you're like, that's a horror movie. But kids can watch it, and that's great. And then, like you were saying, Dave, as well, like, everybody is on their A game in this. Like, it's absolutely phenomenal. It has a lasting legacy because of what it is. There's really nothing that you can really say about this movie where you're like, it's bad, like we mentioned about the ending or the runtime and stuff, and it's got two endings. But when I get to the end of it, I'm like, actually, I'm not mad about it, because we got what we got. You know, this is a truly, like I said at the start of this, that this is a movie that I always wanted to talk about on the show. And there always comes a time, like these episodes, there's always movies that I want to talk about, but I'm never like, I'm going to talk about that next week. You know, like, I never rush them. It just becomes about, there is a time when these movies happen and people send me over what they want to talk about, or I send it over and then I'm like, Poltergeist, now's the time. And when I was watching it the other day, I was just like, I could have still done this episode in like 10 years time and still keep watching this movie on repeat and then go, what a truly fantastic piece of cinema and horror that we got, that, like you're saying, ticks every single box. Like, everybody knows, if you watch it, you know, like I have tick boxes in my brain, so I'm like, and everything's all separated, so I'm like, sound, design, cinematography, directing, performance, all of that is all separate in my head. And that's how I basically, when I watch movies, I like completely rip it apart and then I put it back together again, like smashing over some kids' Lego and then going, you sort it out. And that's how I watch movies. And this is one of those movies that's a true joy to watch, because you can take away all the elements of this movie and then put them back together. But whether you are looking at them separately or together, it's all so well put together. But yet at the same time, could have been made by a fucking million other people. Like, it's such a fantastic movie that it's, every time I watch it, it's a genuine joy to be taken back through nostalgia, as we always are when we watch these movies, and go, when I was a kid, I watched this and I loved it, and it makes you feel about that. But it's also a joy to watch now, where you're like, it still holds up. The effects, some of them might look a little bit shit, but at the same time, like you mentioned earlier, Brian, it's the charm of them, and it's knowing people made these. You know, like, this is true artistry that we're seeing, that somebody made this fucking head ripping off that might not look great, but it's still fucking brilliant. It's a true joy to talk about Poltergeist, and it is truly a fantastic movie. So, and I'm glad that you guys, I'm really glad that you guys think of this movie highly as well, because I have had it where people have come on the show and been like, I don't like it that much, and then for a movie like Poltergeist, it doesn't work. This is the type of movie that, like, it needs to be talked about with love, because there's so much love put into it. So I think this is definitely a movie that it's great to talk about, the love of this movie, and hopefully, people out there who don't really know about this movie or haven't had that love for the movie will go back and watch it and really, really sort of enjoy it a little bit more, and try and pick it apart a little bit more and see the little bits that we do. On the show, really quickly, we have the segment Your First Time. That is where I ask you, the listeners or viewers, anyone out there, to send me over your first time horror movie memory. This one's a really quick one. This one was sent over to me on Instagram by SP Film Viewers. You can go and follow them over there. They put, my earliest memory of seeing horror was watching The Others on TV that I had recorded, and it really got under my skin at an impressionable age. That was the gateway into my love for the horror genre. And that's, once again, what I really like about that is that, like, for me, and for obviously a lot of us, our entries into the horror, like for mine was Alien and Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and so on. And when I read that, for me, it's interesting to see there was a time when The Others, that was somebody's integration into horror.
I gotta tell you, The Others is a spooky movie, man, and it's got a great twist too. So yeah,
great twist. Cinematography in that film is fantastic as well. It's like a great looking movie, great performances. But that's one of the reasons why I truly love this segment, because I love knowing what people's sort of journeys they've been on and when they started. And when you get to see like somebody's journey starting with something like The Others, which for me, even though it's like 2000 and something, God, I don't even know what it is now, but 2000 and something, even those days still feel like a couple of weeks ago for me. So even when that came out, I'm like, that's a new movie, but it's obviously not. It's an old movie now in regards to just time. Once again, it's just constantly going, and all I'm doing is getting.
That would come out in 2000.
I think it's like 2001.
Yeah.
I think so. But now you think to yourself, fucking hell, that's a long time ago, and why am I getting so old? But it's nice knowing that was somebody's journey. I always do ask my guests really quickly if you can remember your first time memories as well, because I always like to hear them.
So I've talked about this on our pod. Like, I did not see this movie when it came out, but my dad took me to see The Empire Strikes Back at a movie theater that was also showing Friday the 13th. And, and you would go in and they would have, the posters on the wall for all of the, all the movies that they were also showing. And that poster captured my attention. And I was 5, maybe. No, I was 4 at the time. And so like I can't, like, the effect that it had on me, like, it makes perfect sense, like what happened next in my life. So yeah, that was like a really sort of important moment. I had no idea what it was about. It's really hard to sort of tell, especially if you can't read, like, what that movie is about based entirely on that poster, but it suggests a lot.
You were like, that's a fucking cool poster.
I was like, I'm going to see that movie. And then I did.
When I'm old enough.
I don't remember. I think my first experience with it was the It's a Good Life segment from the Twilight Zone movie.
Oh, yeah.
Where he wishes away the girl's mouth. Scared the shit out of me.
It's a spooky scene. Oh, my God.
Yeah. I think that was the first thing I remember in terms of horror was probably that.
And there were also what was it? The old cable guides that they used to send, the print when like cable was like a new thing. They'd send out a little magazine that was like, it was like a TV guide for HBO, and it would have pictures and stuff like that. And I remember there was a photo, the promo photo from the burning of Cropsy with the checks on the girl's neck. Again, couldn't read, had no idea what that movie was even about. But that scene, I was like, holy shit, I got to see that movie.
And then you regret seeing it, though, don't you?
I haven't seen The Burning in a really long time.
It's terrible.
It is one that it's really funny because my memory is fucking awful. Like, it's so bad. And over the years, like, because obviously, like yourselves and that, like, I've been watching horror from so long ago, and obviously so much time has passed that I get to a point where I genuinely forget if I've seen movies. And The Burning is always one of those movies that I watch it and then like I could be like a year later, and I'm like, I don't think I've seen The Burning. And then I put it on, I'm like, I've seen this like fucking 10 times. Like,
It's a sign of quality. We forget it immediately.
Yeah. But leading into what you were saying, and I think that is once again one of the strengths and one of the most important aspects of the iconography of what horror is like, I don't really remember what rom-com covers and shit like that were. But when horror, the iconography of the posters and the VHS cover arts that we used to go into, you know, the rental stores, and we'd be like, how fucking cool is that? And then you'd start reading about it and you'd be like, why am I not seeing that? Like, it's so the iconography of the aesthetic, the look, the imagery of what horror was and still continues to be, you know, like, it's so impressive that from a genre that we all know gets treated like a piece of shit and like it's street trash and like, you know, like it shouldn't be part of what cinema is. All it does is save cinema, but it's been doing that for fucking ever. But I truly love, like you were saying, like you hadn't even seen Friday the 13th, but the imagery of that poster, it could have been any of the other posters, but it was a horror poster that was created that made you feel what you felt. And like with the Twilight Zone and stuff like that, like that is still like loads of that is the blueprint and the influence of what so much came after it. But the iconography of what the Twilight Zone is still so important to horror. But it's just horror is so important to what cinema is, but it is so important to us individually on so many different levels that it is like, it's just so interesting. Like I just want to do a fucking course for the rest of my life talking and thinking about the iconography of what horror is in every fucking like every different section that you can think of. You can be like, you know, the iconography of the images, iconography of the sound, you know. Horror is so important, and that's why it's so important to us, because it makes us feel something no matter what it is that we're seeing. And there is no other genre that makes me feel like that. You know, like I always say, I could have just done, I love movies in general, and I could have truly just done, and I probably should have, but I should have just done a podcast that is about every movie, because the amount of times I want to sit there and talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I mean, is every day. But
we did just that, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, we started a second show just to talk about other kinds of movies.
Yeah, exactly. And I sit there, especially now after like over 4 years of doing this, and I think to myself, I could have done that, but I specifically chose horror because there is like a truly deep-rooted love for horror in me. Like when I was a kid, the first movies I watched was horror. The first magazines I was stealing was horror. I felt like a fucking naughty kid if I was watching and doing or talking about horror, you know. And so I have so much to thank for horror. But I think going back to what this movie is, I think that this movie is truly part of that iconography of horror as a kid. I think it's like a really good foundations of horror for a kid, like you were saying, to really like go, oh, this is what horror's like. And then your journey evolves going on onwards and so on. So I talk about it all the time, but unfortunately horror is something that is so disregarded, which obviously it fucking shouldn't be. So fuck everyone else. So there we go. So so thank you to SP Film Viewers for sending me over their first time horror movie memory. If you want yours read out on the show, all you've got to do is go onto our socials. Send me over a DM. We're on all of them. You send me a DM and I'll add it to the list and I will read it out on the show. But Bryan, Dave, now is your time. Your time to absolutely promote the absolute shit out of everything you do with Bring Me the Axe podcast. Obviously, you've got like the side sort of shows that you do within the podcast itself as well. So feel free. Now's your time.
Yeah. We are Bring Me the Axe Horror Podcast. You find us wherever you get podcasts. Spotify, Apple, you know, all the aggregators, we're everywhere. The whole thing with our show is we tend to cast a little bit more of a critical eye towards movies. Not exactly, you know, we've got movies that we absolutely shower with praise, but a lot of the times, I mean, like we feel like horror is as much a legitimate genre as any other. It tends to be dismissed by everybody, but it's worthy of criticism, and so, you know, we give it that respect. If we don't like a movie, man, we're gonna tell you. But we've also got 99 Cent Rental, which we hit a spot while we were doing that where it was like, it'd be great to talk about sort of not otherwise specified weirdo stuff, because we grew up in the sort of pre-Blockbuster era where every video store in America was just chocked full of weird shit, and we watched all of it. And so we essentially will take, like, we've done like Bronx Warriors, we've done The Warriors, all just strange stuff, but it's essentially the same show, it's the same format. It's us just kind of like giving you the deep, like as deep research as we can, and cracking wise about it the whole time. We've got a Patreon platform where we've got an X-Files rewatch series over there called Do You Think I'm Spooky? We're about halfway through season 1. Have
you seen all the X-Files? I do want to know, before you carry on, what's your favourite X-Files episode? I've got to know, if you have one yet. Do you know?
Oh, yeah, Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
Okay.
Mine is Clyde Bruckner's Final Repose.
Okay. I mean, if you know my love of Bruce Campbell, you'll know that mine's Terms of Endearment. But there's something so fucking weird and dark about Bruce Campbell in that movie, where I feel like for once we didn't actually see Ash, we saw Bruce Campbell in that episode. So that was really nice. Right, I'll let you carry on. I love the X-Files, so I always want to know.
Yeah, and then like the Patreon thing is a whole thing. Like, people, you subscribe for $5. There's a radio show I do with music. And then once a month, because our milieu tends to be like the 80s, like I think like a solid 50% of the movies we've covered are all from 1982 for some reason. We've started up just like an exclusive Patreon series that just covers stuff made within, the last like 20 years. So that's all going on over there. Yeah, we're on Instagram. Bring me the Axe Pod. Dave's over there. That Queer Wolf. Yeah, that's pretty much our deal.
Awesome. Well, look, everybody, if you're not already, which I'm sure you will be, but go and support that, and go and listen, go and watch, go and enjoy everything that Bring Me the Axe do, because what I love, and I knew you would when you come in on this show, is that like you guys do the research stuff, obviously something that I don't fucking do, because I'm too dumb to do all that sort of stuff. Like, I try, but it doesn't work up here.
Love yourself. Be nice to yourself.
I'm trying to. Everybody knows that I can't do that. Everybody knows that I'm the worst fucking person in the world to myself. But I try to. But yeah, you guys, like, obviously it's great having you guys on the show, not only just to bring, because I love you guys, like, in regards to, like, the comedy aspect that you bring to your show is so fresh and something I really enjoy anyway as well. But I do love the fact that you do your work, you do your research, and you actually talk about, for someone like me who, loves the ins and outs of what a movie is. It's not just about watching it, it's about understanding it. And that's what's great about, having a podcast like yours, is about learning stuff about it, understanding the movie, but also enjoying you guys talking about whatever that is. So everybody go out and make sure you go and check out Bring Me the Axe podcast, obviously on all platforms. Rate, review, all that sort of shit, because it genuinely helps. I say this all the time on pretty much every episode. It genuinely helps more than what people know. Just by clicking a star on Spotify, it helps so much. Sharing it on, it helps so much, because unfortunately we can only do so much.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned yourself with Patreon, I always have to do a very quick shout out, because I have 3 patrons. I have Jamie Burns, aka Disco Doctor of Death, which is the name we came up together for him. Rob Miller, and Leighton Collins. You are my honorary creeps, my creepazoids over there. Obviously, with both of us, you can head over to Patreon, search for our podcast. You can find us. One of the big things with my Patreon that I do at the moment, I have the Creeps Choice episodes, which is where my creepazoids choose me a movie to watch. And then I do a very sort of like a quick review, like a little podcast episode, but all about the movie that they chose. So if you want to know more about it, you can go over there. So far, it's gone fucking bad for me, because I have felt so awful talking shit about the movies that they've given me. They keep on giving me movies that I don't like. And
I get you. We had some very special guests on to talk about the Blair Witch Project, which is like their favorite movie of all time, like just really loving it, feeling it. And we do not care for that movie. And we were we were the biggest villains in the world because of it. So I get you.
I thought we were being very fair. The internet disagreed.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Because it's like, I mean, luckily these episodes don't go out to everyone. It's just on Patreon. But I'm constantly trying to be as constructive as I can about it. But ultimately, I do just say, if it's shit, it's shit, and that's just like you were saying about being as honest as you possibly can be on your show and so on. And that's exactly how I am on my show. And so far, we've not had a good Creeps Choice episode. So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed, it's something will happen. I can't even remember what the next one's going to be, but whatever it is, I'm worried that I'm going to offend another person. Luckily, by having only 3 Patreons, I've only got 3 people to offend, so that's all. But yeah, so thank you to everybody on a Patreon. But if you want to find out more, then obviously go and support all of our journeys. And anybody else out there who has content that you enjoy, more than likely they have a Patreon, and that's where you can go above and beyond to help us on our journeys. Journeys that we obviously love being on. And this has been such a genuinely, truly fantastic, fun conversation I've had with you guys all about a movie that I feel like I'm going to be watching this movie like before my skeleton gets sold to Spielberg, as we mentioned through the special card. I feel like that this is going to be a movie that like I will be watching. If I'm lucky enough to die when I'm like 100 years old, I will still be watching it 100 years old and going, yeah, what a fucking great movie it is. Like a truly great movie. So thank you to both of you guys, Bryan and Dave, for coming on the show and chatting with me about it.
Yeah. Thanks for having us, man. This was great. I had a great time.
Awesome. Well, there we go. So, as I said, you can follow Let's Talk Horror, Bring Me the Axe podcast socials everywhere. If you're watching this, please make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel that you're watching it on. If you prefer to listen to things on audio, then make sure you follow us on any podcast platform. But until next time, stay creepy, fuckers.